Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Brendan Lee, and my name is Zach Groshell, and this is the second episode of our little mini-series, our little collaboration that we're doing around effective teaching and leadership. Super excited to now be talking more about the leadership and coaching kind of side of our roles. How are you doing today, Brendan?
Yeah, really excited. I really enjoyed our first conversation and looking forward to today's topic of really zoning in on instructional coaching.
I know, it's funny. We put together some questions and put together our thoughts, each of us with 4 points each, see if we can get through them all. But they kind of flowed nicely together. I tried to put a nice order to them. The first one is me, so I think we should just, get started right away. And mine is, schools need an instructional focus for coaching to be successful. And I'll explain what I mean by that. One of the things that has been, I've been to a lot of schools, Brendan. I've been to many different schools, and I've seen this pan out in many different ways where they start an instructional coaching program, or they decide we're going to hire somebody to assume instructional coaching responsibilities, and they don't really have a clear idea of what kind of school they are. They're not very transparent with the community in terms of like where they're going. They don't really have a strategic plan. And when it comes to, school year 2025, often they haven't informed the teachers what we're working on as a school. This makes it very difficult, I think, for instructional coaching to be successful. Much better instead is for leadership and the coaches and whoever's in that position of leading the professional development to really hone in on how can we build off of last year into this year? How can we have a goal for our school and for our teachers that is consistent across all classrooms? For example, formative assessment, or we're focusing on feedback. Maybe we're focusing on engagement strategies around turn and talks and choral response, right? Having a specific focus makes the coach's life easier, and it makes the conversations much more targeted, from my experience. Maybe you can build off of that, unless you don't agree.
No, yeah, really what you're getting at is just the key idea of how important it is for schools to have a really, and I kind of label it as like a razor sharp vision as to and every school's got like this outward facing vision, which essentially looks exactly the same across every single school from here all the way over to America. They all look pretty much the same. But when I'm talking about that razor sharp vision, it's what you're talking about, where it's not just school leaders knowing the direction and the strategic plan, but actually communicating to all of the different stakeholders within a school, teachers, families, students, communicating to them, getting them involved in it, and really finding out, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And then what does this actually look like for each of those different stakeholders as well? And yeah, then only then are you able to really start to understand where does something like instructional coaching actually fit in. So yeah, really great point, and glad that you started with that one. How have you seen schools kind of really get this message across to those different stakeholders?
Well, I think it's sometimes easier when you've got a small little school that's not in a large big district where everyone needs to be equal, everyone needs to have the same thing. I found some of the schools that really got this right were smaller schools working within, not having a lot of administrative bloat and leadership bloat. They really had a centralized strategic plan around a certain way of teaching. Now everybody who may know me from this knows I love explicit instruction, and I talk about explicit instruction all the time, but I've worked at schools where it was the opposite of what I think is effective teaching, like project-based learning. But the fact that everybody was on board with a certain way of developing units around project-based learning was really fulfilling. Our PLCs were around how to develop a project-based learning unit. Our coaching was around that model. Our professional development, the people they brought in were around that model. And it was just coherent. It wasn't a bunch of teachers on islands. This is the type of school we work at. And if you're a parent, you're going, great, this is the type of school I want my kid to be at. Or no, this doesn't fit with my values or my perspective, my ethos of how to educate a child. how did they do it? A lot of it is just getting together that website and that documentation and having a plan and telling people about it and not ditching it when the next shiny object comes around, sticking to it, being like, this is what we do here. And when you come here, you're going to be developed in this way.
Yeah, really good point there. And I think, like you mentioned there, you gave a great example of how often what can happen is because everyone's always looking for that quick fix. So what is everyone else doing? The grass is always greener on the other side, but also what's everyone else doing? And then we're always chopping and changing. And so we never really know if anything has worked or not because we've never actually given it a chance to see if it could work. And then secondly, we're going to, I'm sure culture will fall into this conversation a fair bit, that change fatigue starts to build into teachers and how they're feeling because there's not that clear direction. And every time someone says something in leadership, that gets changed next year anyway.
Well, and I think, because personally I found myself in this position, I think a lot of teachers find themselves in a school that they don't really agree with the approach. And they find themselves, I think, they're trapped because they are comfortable in this job. They've been there for a while and school's kind of changed and it's moved towards something else. And if we don't articulate what a school is, we're going to have a lot of folks who disagree with the school's approach and not knowing where else they really fit in. And you're going to be butting heads a lot of times, lots of different philosophies, right? We're going to have the teaching wars and the reading wars and the math wars all in one building. Why set yourself up as a building to do that, right? There's already enough of these teaching wars online. People can go and explore those all they want. In your school, we hire people with a certain approach and we develop teachers around a certain approach. And if you don't like it, it's so clear and transparent. You're going to get a good reference from me as you move to somewhere that maybe fits your approach a little bit better. That's what I think about it. But I know not everybody thinks it works that way.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I've gone through that exact journey that you're talking about. And one of the things that kind of led me to really start to look at like the implementation science was actually when I was working at a school and I was not on the same page as my principal. And so I started to look at the research. Okay, well, what can I do to change this person's behavior and opinion and the way that they think about things? And so, started to go down that approach. And a lot of people in this kind of science of learning area, a lot of them are really quite isolated. And so some of the things that I started talking about, a lot of people were really resonating with that because they felt exactly the same. They felt isolated, not supported, that there was no alignment between their vision and the school's vision. And after kind of looking at what sort of things we could be doing, and I think it's definitely helpful to understand how people think and the psychology behind our decisions. Often it is just easier to just change schools, find a school where there is a better fit. Like making this sort of change that we're talking about in school improvement is hard enough when you know what to do and you're all on the same page, let alone when you've got competing interests. It just makes it that much harder.
Well, I think this flows from what I said. I think your next one. So I think we should keep plugging on. Your next one says, well, go ahead. You read it. You say it.
Yeah. Coaches need to shrink the change. And essentially there's a few points here that I'd kind of like to dig into. So the first thing is that, and again, this comes back to a lot of the psychology behind like how we think, and we've got all these cognitive biases that just get in the way of clear thinking. One of the points I often make when I'm delivering professional learning is how as human beings, essentially we are lazy thinkers and we will do whatever we can to not have to think hard. And so when it comes to providing professional learning to teachers, they will try to, so they do what's called over-assimilation, where they make connections to ideas when those connections aren't necessarily there. So they'll think on the surface level, yep, I'm already doing that, when in actual fact, there's a lot of like nuances involved in different ways of thinking around, so whether that's, you might be talking about different checking for understanding techniques and they might say, I'm already doing it. But your point is, all right, maybe you're doing it, but you might not be doing it at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. So that's where we can over-assimilate. So that's one reason why we need to be shrinking the change so that we can just focus on one small aspect at a time. Sometimes we, like, as a instructional coach, or if you're delivering professional learning, you could suffer from the curse of knowledge yourself, where, because you know so much, you forget where your kind of teachers are at, and you're delivering all of this information and they're stuck on the first slide that you're talking about. And so, just trying to, really hone in on like what it is that you're talking about. Knowing how much teachers are really struggling at the moment when it comes to workload. And look, I don't think it's at the moment. It's probably been happening since schools were invented, essentially. But knowing that their cognitive headspace is always overloaded and they're never really in the right space to be thinking about change, we need to shrink that change as much as possible. And so how can we do that? We can do that by making these abstract ideas as concrete as possible. So whether that's through observations, modeling, whether it's a video, whether it's watching a live observation, whether it is providing like the resources. I find it quite frustrating as a teacher when you sit through a whole day of professional development and then you're expected to go and create all these resources yourself based on what you've just learned, which is extremely complex. We spoke last time around the complexity of designing learning. And so you've just taught a new idea and then you're expecting this novice to develop a resource based on this new idea. It's next to impossible for them to do that. So if you're going to present a new idea to teachers, provide them with like a worked example of what that looks like, at the very least, if not the whole kind of resource. And I think that's why direct instruction programs have been so successful over the years, is because they shrink the change. So they're supporting teachers through a scripted program. So it can't get any more scaffolded than a scripted program. It's telling you precisely what to say. It's, really supporting that teacher change because they just have to kind of focus on reading the script. And then probably where the professional learning comes into it is then understanding how to be responsive based off that script. So shrink the change, really important, but often not thought about is often we just think about the knowledge building and not actually thinking about the capacity of the teacher to take in that new idea and their understanding, like, do they actually understand what this means for them in the classroom or whatever it is? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, and also like a benefit of shrinking the change too is that when you go into the evaluation kind of stage of this initiative that you put together, you want to evaluate how good the coaching is going or how good the PD is going. When you're sort of just sort of scattershot, like haphazardly, like putting things in on teachers' plates and or maybe you're trying to cover it all. Like I can imagine with this new cognitive science kind of revolution, we're having people going, okay, we're going to do cognitive load theory, retrieval practice, instructional hierarchy, and desirable difficulties. And you start to just kind of start trying to cover. And what happens when it comes to evaluating your results is you don't really know what's responsible for them, right? If you do go up, that's great. Schools can't be labs and can't run a randomized controlled trial. But at the very least, if your results are going in a certain direction, you can have a better reflection and not do so much guesswork on what is working and what's not working when it's a smaller set of things that people are working on at once.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, the other thing I was just thinking about as well, I didn't mention yet, was around how, like, when I first started delivering professional learning, often one of the things that I guess a bit frustrated with was, I've just delivered this, I know it's aligned to the evidence. I thought I'd done it in a fairly engaging manner. And yet you go in and you check in on how teachers are going and their attitudes are still probably quite negative often. And so that comes back to Thomas Guskey's research. Have you seen that around how like teacher attitudes change? And we hope when we provide that professional development that their attitudes are going to be like changing straight away. They're going to buy into this new idea. Yep, I love it. When in actual fact, often what can happen is their attitudes don't change until they've actually seen improvements in student outcomes. So they've actually seen that behavioral change or outcome change. And you actually could pick out those teachers where this has happened to, because a lot of those teachers end up becoming the biggest advocates for this actual change after being like the biggest barriers. Yeah, it's quite funny when you reflect back on it.
Well, I love that one. And I mean, it seems obvious. It seems like common sense, but I think we're attracted to trying to do too much at once. I mean, just being minimalist and parsimonious and focused, such a hard thing to do. Well, I have another one. It's kind of going in a different direction a little bit. And that is this. Coaching, instructional coaching is not just about teaching techniques, but also about fostering teacher judgment. And this has been a debate in my mind that doesn't need to be a dichotomy. Both things can be true. And that's that I think it's really important to stress the technique. I like Teach Like a Champion. I like Step Lab is a platform that I support that has specific granular steps that are techniques, all hands up cold calling or hair talk and so on, Teach Like a Champion type techniques. I think teaching those things is super important. It offloads a lot of that cognitive load that teachers have when they rehearse and practice techniques over and over again. If they have a toolkit, they can go towards one of their tools whenever they sort of are in a pinch, or if there's a little bit of downtime, they have a technique to pull out of their pocket. However, I think techniques on their own are insufficient. I think teachers need to have mental models that allow them to make judgments in real time and actually based off of solid probabilistic predictions, I would say. Like when a good mental model that we've talked about on here is around cognitive load, right? That experts and novices respond to methods differently. And so we need to give lots of worked examples for novices. We need to give lots of problem solving for experts. Having that mental model allows the teacher to understand when to fade and when not to fade. It forces them to think more about student performance in order to make those judgments. And if something's not working, it's as simple as going, well, it's not working. I need to back up. I need to scaffold in smaller increments. I need to be more careful of how I structure this information because they haven't mastered it. We have to teach teachers these mental models, and that's what helps them make judgments in real time. And it's a little bit different than techniques. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, really good point there. Because if we just focus on that technique, then that could be used at the wrong time. And essentially, that's where we've got into these different wars that you've spoken about earlier, where we're just not kind of talking to each other because there's no communication around the fact of it's not so much that you never use that technique, but it's just that you've got to make sure that you use it at the right time. So you're having that kind of mental model. And again, it comes back to having that understanding of how learning happens so that you understand the purpose behind these different techniques and when you might use them. Yeah, really good point there.
And I think a lot of it is, if you do want to just talk about techniques, how do they work in combination with each other, right? Like a lot of people can get a handful of techniques that they like to use, right? But let's think of something like pair share, right? Before you have students pair share, let's say it's a really complex question, you could have them write it down. So do a little stop and jot, and then we're going to do the pair share so that there's a better share, right? Or instead of doing that, you could just do a little think time, right? I'm going to have everybody pause, sit in your thoughts. Now I'm going to have you do your pair share. But what happens after the pair share? Am I going to call on the most brave and excited students who I always call on, or am I going to use cold calling? But now that I did the pair share, hey, it's not going to feel so cold. Everyone should be able to answer, right? Or maybe this is just a one-word question and I can just go ahead and choral response everyone. So like for me, I love to think about how these techniques work together, but I think coaches can underestimate that their coachees are not doing that mental work. They're busy with other things. We have to arm them with these relationships and how these techniques work together. And that, I think, it gets expressed as teacher judgment in the moment when they're actually teaching.
Yeah. And how early on would you start to have these sorts of conversations? So if we start to look at the sequencing of you're looking to put together a sequence of professional learning sessions or coaching sessions, and you're looking at this teacher and you think they could do with a bit of tightening up on this and this technique. How do you sequence that so that they are able to kind of have those mental models to know when to use what and why? Because what you're starting to talk about is the sorts of decisions that you would make when you're closer to an expert level of teaching, to make those decisions on the spot or even plan for them requires you to really have a deep understanding of that technique and also the content as well, because you're talking about like, if some content is more difficult to understand or complex, then that would require you to use a certain technique. But if you don't know that's a complex bit of information, you're not going to know to use that technique either.
I mean, how do you sequence it? Gosh, if this was easy, everybody would just open up the manual and turn to page 1. But I mean, coaches need to know their building and they need to get into classrooms. You get into classrooms at the beginning of the year and you're really doing a lot of kind of diagnosing, analysis. You're trying to figure out kind of what's happening in the building, what teams are strong, who feels isolated, who needs more support, who can support others. So for me, as the teachers are getting the kids used to the routines, I'm analyzing the skill set and the talents in the building, and I'm starting to design from that a PD sequence. It's a lot of like, when I design instruction, we take the task, we work backwards, and we plan the different checkpoints going towards this goal. That's what it is every year, right? I need to look at where's the goal, where are we going towards it, and I need to work backwards and create just little experiences for everyone. And you got to tie that in, not just PD, but you've got to tie, there's coaching cycles, there's just simply people that need to have these conversations during PLCs. You've got to kind of use all these different tools, even a book club, right? Maybe let's get some people together and read a book, right? Maybe that's the solution, but not an easy answer to that one. This is the job of the coach, right?
All right. Yeah, look, this fits in with my next one then. So yeah, instructional coaching should feel like a development process rather than a judgmental one. Look, I'm not sure about what the culture's like over in the US, Zach, but yeah, here in Australia, I know that instructional coaching is probably still relatively new in terms of what it actually is and being like embedded within schools and their processes. And I would say it's still probably not at the majority of schools. It's very much on that kind of beginning phase of something which schools are actually using. So part of that means that most teachers, when it comes to working with school leaders, being observed, that sort of thing, it's more often come as part of a judgmental process. So it's something where schools, they've got to this is a box that they've got to tick. They've got to have a certain amount of observations being done. And generally that will be a school leader kind of ticking boxes saying, yes, this teacher can do this and this. They'll give them some feedback, often feedback which doesn't really align to the professional development that has actually been provided. It's just this one teacher's opinion on another teacher and making these judgments. And so because of that, a lot of the schools that I'm working with, they still have this sense of if they're getting observed, they're getting judged. And so as soon as you have that feeling when there's no psychological safety, walls are going up, you're going to get this very superficial lesson where teachers are going to be trying to present a lesson to keep the observer happy. So they're trying to think about, all right, what does this person want to see? I'm going to show them that. And so then you'll see all of these different things, learning attention, success criteria, this and that, which may not be a true reflection of what they usually do in the lesson, but it's just what they're trying to do to please their supervisor. And so instructional coaching, for me, it should not sit at that same sort of level of being a judgmental process. It should be very much around the coach is working alongside of this teacher to try to help them in improving as a teacher. Because if we're able to get over that myth of a 5-year we get to 5 years of teaching and then we hit that plateau, which can definitely happen. But if we haven't got the right culture, it's going to happen. And so we need to get that out of teachers' heads that you're at this point where you're good enough and you can just keep doing what you're doing. We want to continue to make those small incremental improvements in their teaching practice. But that's where it's the day-to-day interactions that this comes into, where it's not going to happen overnight, or it's not going to happen just because you've started at a school and you've got the role of instructional coach. It's not just going to happen for you. You're going to have to put in the hard yards when it comes to spending time with teachers, getting to know them, building that relational trust. And how do you do that? You do that through showing up, putting your hand up to help wherever possible, continually offering to either team teach or model lessons or just having those different conversations. And slowly over time, you build up that trust and you start with those people who are ready. But yeah, it's definitely a process that you can't skip. It doesn't matter who you are. Yeah, I know myself, having started at different schools, often I'll be really excited to implement these changes. And then I get that reality check of, no, you can't just go in there and start making changes. You've got to put in the hard yards and actually build those relationships and have like a set process as well. This kind of comes back to your first point around the whole school perspective of all of this. If the whole school hasn't got the structures in place that support instructional coaching to happen, it's just not going to happen. It's not one of those things where you can just assume teachers are going to go out of their way to have a conversation with an instructional coach. If it hasn't been timetabled in, you haven't set the date. Like, if that's not there, it's not going to happen.
And yeah, I can almost point to like more warning signs or more negative examples than positive ones for this question, because I've been to schools where the teachers report that essentially the instructional coach is a spy for the leadership. They hang out. They love to talk with each other. Like, if you get close enough to their door, you can hear them talking smack about all the different teachers in the building, right? Or you'll enter into a classroom. This is where you can really feel it. You enter into a classroom and the teacher just goes pale, just completely changes how they teach. Where I see the mark of a successful coach in terms of the relationship building, or at least their credibility as a coach in delivering like what this whole program's about, is they arrive in the classroom and then the teacher looks over them and they both smile. Like, I can't believe it. Look at us both here with all these kids. Let's see what happens today, right? Just that warmth between adults and that they trust you. How you build that up, you're right. It's just you should write a book about it. You should write a book about how to do it, because it is it's tricky, but I think if you understand that how adults tick, and that they are often, can be very defensive, they're protecting their egos, they've been successful, but they understand that at any moment they could have a bad lesson, and they don't want that to be the opinion you take away from it. If you can get that, or you wrap your head around that, you're going to be way better at doing this.
Yeah. And I think like what you're kind of getting at there as well is just around how what is often underestimated is when we're asking teachers to change, they've got to go from being confident and comfortable in what they're doing to now picking up something new and essentially going back to a novice, a beginner, a learner at something, and having to do that in front of a live audience is extreme, an unpredictable audience as well, is really difficult. And so you're asking them to be really vulnerable in order to do that. And so this is where my first point comes into it as well, around shrinking that chain. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for these teachers to make that change. And then the other thing that I really make sure like I do quite intentionally is anytime I'm out in public or working with teachers, constantly just praising. So these are the amazing things that I've seen. Oh, so they came and got the recording equipment off me the other day because they wanted to record a lesson that they were working on. Think, Pair, Share. That was a technique that they really wanted to work on. So they come and saw me in the morning. Brendan, can I borrow the recording equipment? Yeah, awesome. And just highlighting this is like the new norm. This is what everyone's doing. I also had this conversation with so-and-so. And so you're just constantly putting it out there that these are the things that are happening at our school. This is how we operate. This is what we do, so that it normalizes it for everyone that maybe is still feeling a little bit reluctant, because everyone's on their own learning journey, but the more we can kind of normalize it, the easier they'll find it to kind of fit in with what everyone else is doing.
Love it. And this flows into mine, which is going to kind of be the reverse side of this coin.
Yeah.
That we're talking about. My next point is that relationships with teachers should not overshadow the goal of coaching. And I'll say you started with saying coaching being new in Australia and people being used to that kind of high pressure evaluation, coaching not being evaluative. Maybe that's that in some schools may even choose that their coaches do evaluate, right? So that's a tricky area to deal with. However, I will say that in many schools in the United States where coaching has been established for years and years and years, we get this other thing going on, this phenomenon where the coach really thinks that their main job is to build personal relationships with teachers. And I always call it like more of the therapeutic model.
Yeah.
They go and watch a lesson. After the lesson, they meet with the teacher. And then it's just talking about the struggles of being a teacher. It talks about, we just have a chat and we say, hey, I'm here to support you. And what happens with that is, I'm sure you're great to hang out with at happy hour afterwards. But what sometimes comes out of that is that the teacher never gets any better from this. What's the goal of instructional coaching? It's to affect that the student level, they're learning. It's to improve learning. And we have one layer in between us, and that's that this teacher needs to change their performance in order to affect learning. It behooves us to get to that level as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. And yes, we need to set the conditions for the teacher to be vulnerable and to be open with us. Yes, we need to create an environment that people want to work at. All of those fall into the category of professional relationships rather than personal ones. And so I'll say the point again, relationships should not overshadow the goal of coaching, and that's to get people better and so that students can learn more efficiently. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, essentially what you're talking about, it actually really links up to one of your points in our first conversation, just around feedback and having that feedback culture. So if you haven't got a feedback culture, it's a lot easier to kind of dance around it and have this feel-good sort of conversation rather than have a conversation with rigor, which really gets to the point of what things could be done in order for that teacher to be more effective. Yeah, but I guess one of the things I've found that can be helpful here is front-loading those sorts of conversations with the professional learning or the professional development so that you've got a shared understanding around what it is that you're actually talking about. It makes it a lot easier. And this is where like the look-forwards checklist can be really helpful. If you kind of had that professional development, put together a bit of a checklist of, all right, these are the things that you're going to do in the session. Then you have the observation. And then in that follow-up conversation, it's a lot easier to kind of build into that conversation feedback because you've got a shared understanding around what the purpose of that observation actually was and what the teacher was trying to do. And often, if you've got that checklist, the teacher's actually able to self-assess as well because they can see what they've done wrong potentially. And this is, again, where videos can be really effective as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned video because what video does for me is it gets right to the point and you can't hide from video, right? Video, when we're going to sit down next to each other and maybe you've already watched the video and I've watched it privately and now we're coming together to watch it again. But we're going to sit here and we're going to watch this. We're not facing each other, right? We're facing away from each other so it's not confrontational. And we're looking at this third point, which is the video. And when we start talking about the video, often the teacher, because they're an adult, because they are an experienced person with teaching, they have loads of things to bring to the conversation. They just start spilling all sorts of things. They're like, yeah, okay, pause the video, right? Look at this, right? I knew when I was doing it that this wasn't going to go right. I should have explained it better. And then you can start talking about teaching. That's what the main thing you're trying to get to as a coach. It might not happen on day one, but it's that you're talking about teaching with 100% the teachers you're building at some level during the school year. And so, right, not wanting to dance around it, video is a good way. And another one is if you have that instructional focus, you don't need a video, but you can bring resources to the table, or you can have a chat about something that we've been talking about this whole year. It's not something the coach just made up. And now we need to talk about that. We can talk about our shared emphasis as a school. So definitely important. Yeah.
Yeah. I find it really interesting, this one around how teachers want to be treated as professionals and experts. But when you compare our profession to other professions such as doctors, pilots, they have like really extreme kind of protocols that need to be followed. And if they're not followed, they'll kind of be spoken to in quite a stern manner. And I think part of that has to do with if they make mistakes, the feedback to them is quite immediate because people can die essentially. Whereas for us, the feedback in that sense doesn't happen immediately. Well, we don't see those long-term consequences of if we're using poor instructional methods. Often we're not going to see that for 10, 20 years time, where we've got these people who are trying to operate in society and they're illiterate. They're not able to read. They're not able to function, in our society. So I think it just comes back to the more we can have conversations with teachers around like, this is what we're trying to develop as a profession and the reasons behind it. And they keep hearing the same messages and hopefully eventually it kind of kicks through.
Yeah. And there's going to be schools that just get this right? Everybody leaves after 5-10 years at that school going, I've learned more in this short amount of time I've been here than I did in any other school. That place saved me, right? It made me feel fulfilled. It made me feel like I chose the right profession, right? I think that's really what it is. It's a lot like you run this big cross-country race and it wasn't that great while you were doing it, but you could see the finish line. And when you got there, the feeling of success, just like our students, of getting better and mastering this, I think that's long-term motivation that will keep people in the profession.
Yeah. Have you been able to actually coach coaches on this? Yeah. And how have you gone about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a strand of working with new coaches, right? They'll bring me in and we'll do like a coach the coaches thing, right? And coaches bring to me a lot of the items we're talking about. They're saying like, I wish this was in place, or I don't know why I'm not successful. And I think a lot of times when they don't focus on instruction, as is this point, when they are really focused on just trying to please everybody, they start to feel like their job they don't feel very successful. They start to feel useless, right? And so maybe from there they they try to move up the ladder, or maybe they return to the classroom because they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. If we can put the instruction back in instructional coaching, and really it's focusing on that. Not the other stuff is maybe to get to there, or it's a byproduct of it, but it's not the main focus. The focus is on therapy. It's on instruction, and instruction is going to make kids happy and successful. And it's going to make buildings thrive.
Yeah, love that. Put the instruction back into instructional coaching. All right. So my next point is participants need to own the problem. And essentially this comes back to how often as schools, because school leaders are always thinking ahead, they've got that kind of holistic picture. Often they'll see problems that the participants or the teachers don't necessarily see. But when the issue is that when you have that top-down approach of leaders telling teachers what to do without them feeling like there's a need for it, you might get some compliance, but you're not going to really get teachers who are really driving these changes. And if they're not kind of properly buying into whatever this idea is, then they're probably not going to be able to do it effectively either. They might be doing it half-heartedly, if at all, or they might just be ticking that box or saying that they're doing it, but they're not actually doing it. So those sorts of things will start to happen when you have that top-down approach. And so, one of the things that I'll often start coaching conversations with is like just getting them to asking them, if I could help you in any manner in the classroom where you've just got this problem that is constantly stressing you out, keeping you up at night, you're getting anxious whenever you think about it in the classroom, what would that be? And just getting them to list them down. And it could be things like students disrupting during lessons, or they're calling out, or they're getting up out of their seat, or you're trying to do a transition and it doesn't go well, or the way they enter the classroom, whatever it is. And so by doing that, often they'll get to some sort of space where you probably would have wanted them to get to anyway, but they've actually said it themselves. And by them saying it themselves, we're not bypassing them in that decision-making process. So have you looked at Vivian Robinson's work?
Yeah. That's right.
So, she talks a lot about this around how if we bypass them in the decision-making process, then they're going to feel like they haven't been a part of it at all. And, we really want them to be a part of this so that when they do have to make those changes, they feel like it's needed and that is going to actually help them as well. So yeah, generally like how I'll go from there is once they've got that problem, then we'll work out about what are the possible reasons behind it, and then what are some things that we could do to potentially improve whatever that problem is. And yeah, it just has that natural flow from problem of practice to what a potential kind of fix could be as well.
And the ownership place, right? Because this could get nebulous, right? Like, what does it mean to own a problem, right? And like you're saying, like you're defining it mainly as that the teacher recognizes it as a problem and can articulate it, right? Like, how do you go about getting that to be articulated without feeding the answer too much, I suppose, or without adding leading questions that really kind of people start to pick up on what you're doing here. You're facilitating my thoughts, right?
Yeah.
How do you run this type of discussion so that we can get everyone on board in a way that feels authentic?
Initially, it'll be more around like trying to get to that granular level of what the problem actually is. So I'll get them to tell me stories around, okay, so can you just tell me like what's happening? And from a behavior analyst perspective is kind of doing a bit of an ABC on it. So, working out what they need to see to is the behavior and the consequence so that we can start to unpack, essentially what is leading to these problems and what actually is the problem. And by taking that sort of approach, it allows you to, like you said, not so much guide it, but more try to diagnose what the problem is, and then, present some solutions alongside of them. And you got to contextualize those solutions as well. So you could, if you don't have the knowledge base yourself, or even if you do, you could use things like the teaching walkthroughs books from Tom Sherrington and Oliver Camiglioli, or you might use Teach Like a Champion, that sort of thing. Like you might have that text or Jamie Clark's one pages, whatever it is, you bring that out and you just kind of flick through and you could look at, maybe this one might work, or let's have a think about like, how could we contextualize this for your class?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I just think like when it comes to owning a problem too, do you think there's an expertise reversal kind of difference where you get these new teachers coming in? I feel the most successful with them, by the way, because I think I don't need to do this so much. With the new teachers, they come in and they go, so everything obviously is in chaos. Like where's step one? And I go, guess where step one is? It's how you entered the kids into the classroom. We're going to start by that. And we go outside and we practice entering them, right? But as you get to, like you said, as you get to have more knowledge and you've seen different situations in different permutations as a teacher, you start to have a lot of knowledge you can draw on. So then that's where I think maybe the very beginning mentorship, student teaching level, this doesn't work as much. It really starts to work once you've taught just a little bit.
Yeah, definitely right there. Like, if you haven't got the knowledge, then you're not going to really know what to do. But if you've got the knowledge, then, or even just experience, you can start to kind of see how different techniques can be. Yeah. All right. So your next one is around coaching cycles and drop-ins don't need to take all that long.
That's it. Coaching cycles and drop-ins don't need to take all that long. I think that we are told as from different sources of instructional coaching literature that you really need to have a very formal process, I take out a chart and fill out this whole thing with the coach. And that's going to lead to 6, 7, 8 weeks of repeated cycles that is on is in a very structured manner in a certain formula. And I think, number one, I think that it comes off as weird for teachers. I think they feel like you're trying to bring the evaluation process that this coaching thing is supposed to circumvent. You're bringing an evaluation process to their coaching. I don't really like using a lot of those formal tools for that reason. But what I hear from a lot of coaches is they can't get to everyone. They can't get into classrooms. And I think if you ask them, it might be because they're spending too much time on each individual and in each cycle and in each drop-in. I think a drop-in for a classroom, which is one that's not part of any cycle, you're just coming in spontaneously, should really only last like 15, 20 minutes. And spending the whole time in the lesson maybe you can get some picture of something that if you're really curious, you really need to know more information, you stay that whole time. But I think you can be in and out and get a lot of information very quickly, and you can use those notes to launch a coaching cycle. And when you're in a coaching cycle with the teacher, I think it's oftentimes that you can end it when it's time to end it. We've talked about this thing. You did something. I modeled something. We did it. And you can say to the teacher, hey, like, I'm not gonna come back next week. I think you should, let's have you own your own problem and articulate a few things. I think you should go do that. Here's my handoff. Here's the baton. Go and do that for a while. I'm going to go work with somebody else for a little bit, and I'm going to circle back. It doesn't have to be this long, intensive thing, and drop-ins don't have to be 60-minute observations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that point, and I'm really glad that you brought it up because, something that I've thought about quite a fair bit. A couple of things that come into play here. Firstly, just around the complexity of what it is that the teacher's working on. So some things are a lot more complex than other things. And so knowing that, you're right, like some different techniques, it might require to go through that whole cycle, and it might require multiple cycles on the one technique. Whereas other things, it might just be a really quick conversation to a teacher who is closer to that expert level. And you might have just done a really quick drop in, seen this, I love how you're doing that. Why don't you try doing this? As soon as you had that conversation, they're improving. Hasn't required you to have this long sit down conversation with them, but it's still getting to that improvement factor, which is what we're after. So having an understanding around the complexity is going to impact on the conversation and the coaching that is required. And also the other aspect as well, which is not often thought about or spoken about, is the phase of the lesson. So a lot of coaching, you're actually going to be talking to them about things that happen before the actual lesson. So in the planning phase, the preparation and the planning, you might be talking to them about the sequencing of the concept, or coming back to cognitive load theory. A lot of that is going to come down to how you present different ideas, or what wording you use, or whatever it is, what examples you use. So a lot of that is actually coming into stuff that you do outside of the classroom. And so if you're following this sort of coaching cycle, it might not really be relevant because you've had your coaching session already, and you've already achieved your outcome of helping them improve in their actual lesson preparation, which is what they needed right then and there. Not necessarily like it's going to help naturally going to help their in-class session, but that might not be what your focus is for that kind of cycle. But it's still going to be helpful. So having an understanding of what it is that you're trying to improve, and that it doesn't have to just be teaching techniques, or does it? Maybe you disagree with that.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I'm just thinking of an example of a time when all my little drop-ins, my quick drop-ins weren't working, and I had to change the tactic just to go against my own point, right? And I remember there was a teacher I was working with who I'd drop in for 15 minutes, and I didn't really see I didn't see any teaching. I just saw the kids working, right? And so I'm like, I'll come in tomorrow. I got to do these quick rapid fire drop-ins. And I came back the next day at a different time in the lesson, and the kids are working, right? And I'm just like, man, so I do 3-4 more of these at different times, and the kids are always just working. And so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to sit with this teacher all day. We planned it out. Hey, I'm going to be with you all day long. And I found the same thing. It was the kids are continuously given assignments. And what we came out of that was I needed to get the teacher to own the classroom and to teach from the front. It has some teacher-led component of the lesson in order to give them new insights and new information. But in that case, it didn't work. But I think a lot of times, if you really want to be efficient, try getting into like 3 classrooms in the same class period. That's 20 minutes each for 60 minutes. You'd be surprised how much data just that short drop-in will give you. And that will launch something that maybe is way more in depth than that.
Mm. When you do your drop-ins and observations, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think this will be good. When you do that, what sorts of things are you looking for? And secondly, do you have like a set sort of observation sheet that you use?
No, I've done that before where I've created things, used other people's things. at the moment, what I did right before I left the class, right before I left the job, what I was doing was using this program called Step Lab. And so there are other things out there too like this. Iris Connect does this, but basically using a technology platform that allows me to select granular steps, which is your next point, by the way, which allows you to select granular steps. That way, I'm not just sort of randomly diagnosing. I'm sitting here and I'm watching the lesson and I go, okay, is this an attention problem? Is this a thinking problem? Is this a problem involved with practice? What kind of problem is this? I can look at the steps, select the steps, and then the step becomes a granular piece that we can work on together. I can show them videos. I can video them and I can model that technique, right? So instead, I've gone off of the observation form and now gone to a technology platform that gives me the boost that we're talking about here.
Yeah, cool. Why don't I move on to my last point then of, get granular with goal setting. And look, I've definitely looked into Step Lab a bit as well and read Josh Goodrich's book, Responsive Coaching. And so, I've definitely been influenced by that sort of thinking, Peps McRae as well, but all the great kind of instructional coaching books that look at this stuff, Jim Knight and Doug Lemov, they talk about the importance of doing this around doing things like scripting, rehearsal, knowing how success will be measured, having like prompts as well for the teacher where we're asking them to change their teacher habits. And like I mentioned before, you're doing it in a really complex environment. And so if you're relying on your working memory to remember to do this one thing that you're working on, often it will fail you. And so we want to try to have some sort of prompt. So whether that's like a slide on your slide deck or a post-it note that you stick up somewhere, or you might have on your smartwatch, some sort of reminder that goes off at a certain time, whatever it is. I just find prompting, really useful to have. And the scripting part is something so what I used to do, deliver my bit of knowledge building, whether that's through some sort of professional learning session or a conversation. And then I would just make assumptions. All right, they got it. They understand what it is that we're spoken about. They're just going to go and do it. But if you skip the scripting phase, often the teacher at the very best will make some sort of change. Often it won't be precisely what you had spoken about. And that might be either misunderstanding. It might just be they've forgotten parts of it. It might be that they just weren't able to do it in the moment because it's not part of their habit. And so, what I found is once you actually start to script it, firstly, it's your way of checking for understanding and going through that guided practice. So, you essentially go through the gradual release responsibility with the teacher, where you'll start with a bit of modeling. This is how I'll do it. Then you do a bit of guided practice. Right now, let's do it together. Let's write it down. Let's think about what's going to happen. What will you be doing? What will the students be doing? And then the rehearsal part is that practice. So now we're trying to build that fluency so that the first time that they actually have to do this new technique, it's not in front of their unpredictable students, but it's actually in front of you, the instructional coach, and you're able to prompt them, provide them with that scaffolded support prompting. They might literally have their script in front of them and read from it, and I always say to teachers, it's actually fine for you to actually read your script in front of the students. They do not care. So
they don't care.
They don't care. Yeah. And then knowing how success will be measured. So looking at things like measuring opportunities to respond or time on task, time off task. They could be like really measurable things, or it might just be your look for's checklist. Has a teacher just done the steps that you agree that they would work on? And that could be, really observable as well. So getting granular, I found is, really important. Otherwise you're making assumptions, and anything that we assume things, we're probably going to be wrong.
Yeah. I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, there are like kind of instructional coaching debates around granularity. And again, thinking back to what we've talked about so far, like a model of coaching that really doesn't get to instruction, but is more just general what the Brits would say, airy fairy. I don't know if you say that, but
Yeah.
right. It's just sort of like teaching is this big thing that we can't put into words. It defies technique. We aren't technicians. We are artists or something. And when you do that, you don't give teachers something to work on. You don't have an object that they can work on and try to rehearse, right? There's no, and maybe to the teacher, it feels a little bit too small, but if the success comes out of achieving that small granular step, and then you go, all right, well, we're on to the next one, right? And it gets this really nice bounce, I think, to your craft when you're like, okay, I mastered that, and maybe we'll come back, but let's try something new. And I'm achieving something. This isn't just Zach coming into my classroom, giving me his opinion about something, and then we discuss on in what it's like to be a teacher. And then I go home and I'm really the same person that I was when we started this whole thing.
Yeah. Teachers really find it quite useful as well, and useful in terms of not just making improvements, but useful with their time. Whereas in the past, when we haven't had this granular focus or putting research into practice, when we haven't had that focus, teachers will leave these PD sessions feeling a bit empty of, oh yeah, they might feel good at the time. Yeah, that was good. I enjoyed it. But now what? Whereas the stuff that we're talking about is really putting these different ideas into action, which is really the only way that we can know as an instructional coach that we're having some sort of impact if teachers are actually changing what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love this discussion we've had, right? I believe in this instructional coaching thing. I don't think it's a fad. I don't think it's a next buzzword. I think it's something that just, it has a really powerful rationale. PD, like you said, one-off PDs, they often don't get into the classroom. They need to go hand in hand with some sort of job embedded PD, something that is happening in real time. There is somebody who is there to support, is there to slide into your lesson, is there to give you feedback afterwards. And that craft of doing that, I don't think we've achieved as a profession. We've not transmitted that knowledge to the next generation of coaches. We're all trying to figure this out on our own. If we could end everybody's discovery learning in the instructional coaching world and just get them to use some of these things we've talked about today, I think coaching would be a lot more successful.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like comparing us to other professions, let's look at sport again, right? Coaches in sport, they use videos extensively to analyze techniques, and athletes appreciate the video so that they can actually get a concrete understanding of what it is that the coaches are asking them to do. Otherwise, we're talking in this abstract space constantly. And so, yeah, having the videos, having like this shared understanding that we're on the same team, all in this together. Maybe we're not trying to win a grand final. What we're trying to achieve is student learning outcome improvements. And there's nothing else that we're trying to achieve right now. This is it. As an instructional coach, I'm just trying to help you help the students. Yeah, that's all it is.
Love it. Well, if people are going to keep coming back, like if Pam Snow's back on, hey, I heard she said she listened to it, right? There's some people they're probably going to keep coming back. What do you hope for the next one? Have you thought about like our topic? What should we do for our third episode together?
Yeah, well, there's a few options. We could go back into the classroom again and look at maybe some of the misconceptions out there. I've seen some of that popping up in the social media realm of those misconceptions or myths, educational myths. We could look at that. We could go to the next level of what do schools need to be doing to support improvement. We've touched on kind of the middle leadership level, but we could potentially look at that next level, or we could go full big picture of what needs to change in education. What do you think?
I'm excited. Maybe we should put it to the social media. Ask people, what do you want to hear the most? Well, I've loved our discussion today around one of my favorite topics, instructional coaching. Brendan, it's such an honor. I think that we're collaborating together. I look forward to these every time. To listeners, thanks so much for listening to Knowledge for Teachers or Progressively Incorrect. Take care.
Thank you.